But I just didn't go any further. I mean, I talked to it about it with my brother-in-law. He lives in North Carolina, and we were, you know, we're both Bigfooters into it and all. He's like, that'd be cool, pretty cool if you guys were related. Well, I just went on, you know, I read Bigfoot stuff all the time. You know, we were doing, you know, online community and all that. And last Thanksgiving, my dad called me, and he was diagnosed with lung cancer, and it was terminal.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
And so he began to try to send us some things on our ancestry because we knew basically nothing about it. And in May, the end of May, this past year, he told me that he went to the doctor after his 5th chemo treatment, and they found no sign of cancer whatsoever in his body. And he'd only got so far with the ancestry stuff. And in 3 weeks later, they called, and they said he had hours to live. So we had to run down there, and he died while we were there. I was the last person to see him alive. I mean, we were all there in the room, but he died not long after I got there. But as part of the grieving process, I got on Ancestry.com and just kind of started probing myself, you know. And come to find out, that guy was one of my ancestors.
Oh, wow.
7...
What was the story?
Well, his name's John Alexander Osteen, but it just says John Osteen in the article. And he and his family moved from South Carolina into some county in Georgia, and I don't remember, I'd have to look in the article. And with his parents' families. And he served in the Georgia militia under a general who had been in the Revolutionary War. And he served in the militia in the Seminole War of 1817. There were some after that, I think. There were 2 or 3 of the Seminole War. After that, he moved to what is now Ware County, Georgia, which is on the line between, you know, right on the Florida-Georgia line.
Right.
And it was a different county then, and then they separated it into Ware County. And he was in the Georgia militia there too, but it was a different unit number. And he was in 1829, he was elected to the lower court as a justice. You know, like small claims court nowadays would be. And there was a drought in 1829, a severe drought. And the swamp there, I guess it's the Okefenokee Swamp, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. And parts of it that had never been dry before, that that white people knew about, were dry. And a couple of guys and a kid or whatever went in, you know, deep in the swamp, looking around, whatever, hunting and whatnot. And they came out and said that they came across some just gigantic footprints, but they were human-like. You know, I mean, you know the stories there, you know. And they said it had to be some gigantic monster, and they had heard it roar and whatnot. And so they all got together, several men of the town, including my great whatever 7 times grandfather, and got weapons together, and which were all muzzle loaders and things like that at that time, and went on a monster hunt, sort of, you know, the pitchforks and
right.
And they went into the swamp with these other gentlemen, and they were in there for, I think the article said 2 weeks. But that I don't know if that's exaggerated or what. And before they found any tracks, but it was probably in the same area the first guys did. And they camped on some kind of little island-like area, even though the swamp was dry, you know. And sometime during the night, the creature came upon them. And whoever was on watch, you know, yelled, you know, and then started to shoot. And it killed several of them, all but just a few, but they were shooting it the whole time. And I'm not sure how many people there were, 8 or 9 or something like that.
So it was a hunting party.
Right.
Okay.
And only a few of them made it back.
So this creature allegedly killed all those people?
Except for a few, maybe 2 or 3 or 4, something like, I'm recalling from memory the article that I read and the stuff on Ancestry.com. But they killed the creature. Oh. They called it a man mountain. and that's what it's called in the article.
A man mountain?
Yes. And they said that, under torchlight, they looked at it. It looked like a gigantic man covered with hair. And they said they measured it by laying rifles out. And they claimed it was either 12 or 13 feet long. Now, I'm sure that's an exaggeration.
Right.
But, you had people that are horrified.
Sure.
And they waited till daylight and left. Carried their weapons, and that was it. Left everything else and struck out because they were afraid that there were probably other ones there, and and they got back out. And there were a couple of articles, but the one in the historical Bigfoot was from a newspaper up north somewhere. I found another one from a newspaper in Georgia. But let's see. They basically based most of the truthfulness of the episode on the character of my ancestor because he was a judge there and his service in the militia.
Yeah, we actually have that article in our archive.
I was going to say, it sounds familiar.
Yeah, we have about 400 articles, and that's one of them.
We do.
So you're saying that one of the individuals that was named in that article is an actual relative of yours?
Yes, John Osteen.
No kidding.
Right.
Yeah.
At that time,
that's one of my favorite articles of all time. I've read every one of these 400 that we have.
They did a reenactment of it on Monster Quest on the swamp beast.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. They were dressed in period gear and everything when they did it. I remember that.
And at that time, when I watched it on Monster Quest, they didn't. Of course, there were no names mentioned. I had no clue. When I read it in the article, I saw the name, and they put an A after the E, which is a mistake. In the art, of course, they did it in some northern newspaper. In the Georgia one, they got it correct, and that's before they started putting the apostrophe in. Osteen it sounds like an Irish name. It's not. It's a Germanic name actually, and the apostrophe came in way later for some oddball reason. I'm not sure.
So you're rewriting this. You're writing this as a story now.
I wasn't going to write that
one
as a story. Well, I was going to put that in the collection of stories.
Okay.
And I was going to put that as the first one. As
the descendant of
yeah, come through.
Really cool,
and I thought that would be pretty cool as the initial one. Even though it's kind of out of order, because I was going to kind of go back to Leif Erikson and his potential, depending on how you interpret it, but potential.
I don't know how many articles you have access to, but I'd be willing to share our articles that really just me and Melissa have access to with you, if you want to see them.
Sure.
If you like reading that kind of stuff, and you're welcome to use any of them.
A lot of those, people at that time, they weren't trying to just like people nowadays. People hear a sound in the woods and they think it's a Sasquatch. Some of these people do, that report stuff. My gosh, there was someone that was on the BFF all the time. That they had a Sasquatch that would come and sit with them wearing overalls and smoke cigars on their porch. I mean, come on now, and then back then.
What were they smoking?
Yeah,
they were smoking it together. Probably.
Yeah, they grew. They grew whatever it was. And back then people were just exploring this country. They didn't know what was here. They didn't have any reason to really exaggerate or to.
Well, news wasn't instant back then either.
Right.
So, and there wasn't the time to fabricate and not like there is now. You couldn't, have so many people working on a plot to get something done quickly and communicate instantly like you can now.
Oh, yeah. And they weren't going around taking pictures of the woods and trying to see something in there.
Well, and it was the new frontier, like you said, so they were ready for anything a lot of the time, and you never know. Those guys never knew what they were going to get. Right. A lot of the articles that I've read or whatever, I just assumed they always had their rifle in hand and their horse, and they were going into new frontier, and the Indians or savages as they called them then, they were always wary of the Native Americans as they ran into those, whether they were friendly or not friendly, and so they had to be prepared for anything. And it's always really fascinating to me to read some of those stories and the stories that they were able to capture some of these creatures.
Absolutely.
Because today nobody's is ever able to capture one, it seems, but they were, and and I talked about that with some somebody, and I said, because these guys were living on the fringe and they had to be ready for anything, they
Yeah,
always
they
had
knew.
their rifles. And these guys, they plowed fields, they were farmers. These guys were in good shape and they were strong. If you got a group of these guys together, they could pull something down.
Oh
They
yeah,
could.
because people
So,
now they're like,
yeah.
oh, you
And now,
can't catch one. They're way smarter
We're
than
all
us. They're
fatties
just- I'm
sitting
like,
behind a
come
computer
on.
now,
Yeah.
so nobody, you're not going to be able to do, and the average, the average person doesn't know how to defend themselves with a weapon, or that they would be afraid. Whereas these guys, they were ready for anything all the
Oh,
time.
yeah.
That was just their frame of mind. Their point of reference was completely different from ours today.
They're inside the courthouse and I can't remember what county, Kentucky. There's a mural of Daniel Boone shooting a wild man.
Oh,
I have a
wow.
picture of it
Where is
saved
it?
on my computer.
Where did you find it?
It's in Kentucky, in whatever county I assume that he lived in, but I'm not 100% sure, or where he claimed to have shot.
So it's
it.
a painting then that's been done, or
Yeah.
drawing?
It's either a painting or it's a tile mosaic. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But there's like a dome roof or something. I've got a picture of it on my computer.
Okay.
And it's of Daniel Boone shooting. He called it a Yahoo, but it was a wild man. with
Right.
Hair all over it. He claimed that he shot one. And there's a mural of it in the courthouse, permanent. It's like a painting or
That's
tile
really
work or something.
interesting.
I don't know.
I'd love
which
to
one.
see a copy of that. If you forward it to me, I'd love to see it.
All right,
That's
I'll
awesome.
send it. It's really cool because he's one of the first people that claimed to kill one here in the United States,
Yeah.
or one of the earlier ones. And you guys know about Leif Erikson and his. He claimed that
I've heard that he might have had a run-in, but I don't know all the particulars about the
well,
story.
he claimed that those are what ran him away from here.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
And look, the words that he used, the Norse words that he used, describe ugly, black-eyed, big, hairy people. Now, a lot of scholars have said, no, he was just talking about the natives here. But there aren't any Native American, well, I'm a Native American, we all are, but you know what I mean, any
Right.
indigenous peoples
Right,
here
right.
that are hairy.
Covered with hair.
Right.
Right.
Right. Or black-eyed,
Yeah.
or really very big,
Yeah.
So, surely he was not describing Indians, American
It
Indians.
doesn't sound like it. I wouldn't think he would be so terrified
No,
of that.
and Vikings, my
They
gosh,
were hardy people.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
my gosh, their idea of heaven was every morning you wake up and have war and kill each other, and then you have a great feast that night. You come back alive, and go to sleep, and wake up the next morning and massacre one another all over again.
Right.
These are not
They were
wimpy people,
Hardy, sturdy people.
right? So
Not easily intimidated.
correct, right. Right. But the ones that I intend to write full-length stories or books about.
Mm-hmm.
My wife, by the way, her first book will be out for sale. I think this spring, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, but it's a romance. So. Has nothing to do with
After her with the boys.
But one is Tuklo Neshoba told a story online on a forum that I don't even think exists anymore. It might. About a group of Choctaws, the Light Horsemen. They were a unit of the Choctaws that were like martial